Well, as you said, I'm Eliza Easton, come from the UK, from Nesta, which is the UK's innovation foundation. But in short, we back big ideas to try and solve some big global problems in lots of areas, but specifically in healthcare, in education, in sort of new economies, so the creative economy and digital economies. And within Nesta, I am the principal policy researcher for the creative economy and data analytics. I work with around 14 exceptional data scientists, and I obviously have the world's longest job title. But also, importantly, it's one that didn't exist 10, let alone 20, 30, 40 years ago. And in my team, I also have Python experts, another job which didn't exist 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And pretty much everyone that I work with has a job that careers advisors at my school, at least, would never have heard of. So it's perhaps no wonder that given this rapid pace of change, people are concerned about the future of work. And people fear, as we've already heard today, their jobs being taken by robots, be left without a way of earning their living. And more worryingly, certainly not the people in this room, but it can feel to me like policymakers want to bury their head in the sand. They prefer to maintain the status quo rather than trust what they see as Mystic Meg-like guesswork of researchers like me. They fear backing the wrong horse in this debate, or in this case, perhaps, backing the wrong driverless car. And it's true that in the past, predictions haven't always been wholly accurate. Don't need to look too closely at the numbers, but this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the States, which predicted that between 88 and 2000, service assistants would grow by, I think, 45%. In fact, they grew by around 141%. They also didn't predict changes in welfare laws, which meant they grossly underpredicted the need of job training for the poor, the elderly, for the disabled, and for the mentally ill. But were these predictions useless to policymakers? I'd say not, because overall, their accuracy was actually pretty good. With very few exceptions, these 80s economists predicted which occupations would grow in terms of a percentage of the workforce, and which would shrink, even if they got the level or the speed of that growth wrong. And at Nesta, we too believe that we need to know about what jobs could look like in the future. For example, what jobs could literally be done by computers, to have more choice in terms of what we want them to look like. Exercises like this one can provide information about big trends that help businesses, policymakers, and educators to make better decisions, even if they can't guarantee certainty around any single sector. This is particularly important because, again, as we've already heard today, changes are almost inevitably likely to negatively impact the most vulnerable. Those with the least ability to retrain themselves, for example. And so we need to really understand how these impacts might affect the entire economy to protect those people. So the trend that gets the most airtime, at least at the moment, and certainly already in this conference, is automation. And several years ago, researchers at Nesta started thinking about the impact of automation on the workforce. As these headlines show, the risk of automation has already been seismic across industries, and the fear of jobs disappearing has caused mass concern. And that's perhaps not surprising when all you have to do is visit your local supermarket to see your cashier has been replaced by self-service checkout machines, or, as we heard earlier, visit the cinema to see you only have to put your card into a machine rather than speak to someone on the other side. But again, as we've heard, automation hasn't affected all jobs. And starting our work in this area, we wanted to find a proxy to understand which jobs it was likely to affect. And for us, or our hypothesis was it was going to be the creativity of the jobs, rather than salary, for example, that would tell us the most about how likely a job was to be automated. And we defined these creative skills quite broadly from what has traditionally been called the creative industries in the UK, the skills associated with them. So that might be design or the type of communications needed in advertising, right through to the type of originality that might be needed in an engineering role or in academic work. And we found that, lo and behold, in both the US and the UK, 9 of every 10 creative jobs is resistant to automation, in comparison to around 35% across the workforce. So why is this? Well, if you imagine a manufacturing firm that's trying to be a global leader, they may well replace some of those routine clerical jobs with machines or robots, but they're going to be in increasing need of a whole range of jobs that require creative skills, whether it's the communication skills that can help them advertise their work, or the design skills that really set them apart in a global marketplace. If you think about Apple, for example, absolutely needs core engineering skills. Really, it's an engineering firm, but it's design skills that have allowed it to really set itself apart. There's the first piece of work. If anyone wants to find these, I just thought it was useful to kind of show how we changed in terms of what we did on Future of Work. But it's important to remember that automation isn't at all the only impact on the future of jobs. And these other trends, which are so often forgot in those shock headlines, are also going to change what we need in the workforce. For example, an ageing population in the UK is very, very likely to lead to an increased need for carers. And the emerging green economy, again, leads a whole range of skills, including things like engineering and biophysics and architecture. And so last year, we conducted a piece of research in partnership with the education publisher Pearson, which took all of these major factors, including automation, into account, using this slightly complex and probably too small to see methodology, which was analysis of trends mixed with expert input and machine learning. So what did we find? Well, you don't need to read every single line on this, but broadly, at the top and the bottom, you can see that around 1/10 of jobs we predicted are very likely to grow as a percentage of the workforce up to 2030, and around 1/5 are occupations which we predict are very likely to shrink. And in the middle, you can see occupations which we say, although we can tell kind of the likelihood of growth or shrinking, we simply say we don't have enough information to know what they'll do for certain. Perhaps unsurprisingly, especially given that separation between low and high-skilled jobs, we find that many of the jobs that are likely to decline are low or medium-skilled in nature, and you can see those in sort of pinks and purples at the bottom of, it's there for me. You can see those in pinks and purples at the bottom of the diagram. These are things like storage occupations and certain types of sales assistants, as we've already spoken about today. And as in the work we did on automation, jobs in creative, design, engineering sectors are likely to have very bright outlooks, strongly complemented by new digital technologies. We also found that education, healthcare, and public sector roles, hopefully to the happiness of many here, are also very likely to grow, and you can see teachers at the top, while some very low-skilled jobs in fields like construction or agriculture, again, are likely to grow, especially as a result of some of those other trends, things like the growing green economy. But job titles and even sectors can only tell us so much. A job title can easily stay the same, whilst the underlying skills needed for those jobs change radically. And so we went beyond the titles, using that analysis of jobs to understand what underlying skills were going to be most important for this workforce of the future. And here we found evidence of a group of softer cognitive skills that were also likely to robot-proof existing jobs. Things like judgment and decision-making, fluency of ideas, complex problem-solving, systems analysis. Next, we decided that we wanted to understand how all the various skills that the workforce needed in the context of the labour market, whether it was already moving to meet the requirements of the workforce of the future, or whether there were ways in which, at least on the UK and for the US, it needed a sort of shove to catch up. And so to analyse this, we determined the prevalence of skills in the UK workforce using in the UK ONS data on occupation composition and in the US ONET data. We could then identify the most and least prevalent features of the workforce. For example, in the UK, English language, written comprehension, customer service were all very common, whilst things like night vision, equipment maintenance, fine arts were all very rare. And then we used our original research to plot outliers, where we were predicting that jobs would grow, but the market didn't seem to be responding. So jobs here like design, skill sets here like design and clusters like engineering and technology seemed to be underprovided in terms of the workforce, where the frequency was actually dropping, even though we were predicting an increase. And that makes sense when the engineering community in the UK says we lose about £2 billion a year from skills shortages in their sector, whilst things like clerical knowledge seem to be over-provided by the market, despite our arguments that that's likely to decline. But again, we didn't stop research here. Policymakers asked us to focus on digital skills in particular. And one of the reasons for this is that digital skills, because of the rapid pace of change with what's required, often don't feature in traditional skills surveys. So in the UK, we use the Employer Skills Survey, and it's really not good at understanding the rapidly changing need for different digital skill sets in the UK. And so we started to look at a new piece of work, this time thinking about what jobs were most and least likely to grow in terms of the digital skills they require. And to do this, we used 41 million job adverts, which we analysed to understand the digital skills that could future-proof your job and those that couldn't. And what we found surprised many policymakers back in the UK, even though perhaps it won't surprise those in the room as much, that in fact you are at the moment more likely to need one digital skill in jobs that are going to decline, or we predict are likely to decline as a percentage of the UK workforce, as you are in those that are likely to grow. And this is because of jobs like teachers and chefs that are very likely to grow as a percentage of the workforce, but at the moment don't require a single digital skill. But, of course, digital skills are going to be needed in the workforce. And so we developed our own skills taxonomy to group these skills into clusters from those original job adverts, to think about which groups, which clusters, were most likely to impact whether your job was likely to grow or likely to decline. And our results showed that digital skills like Microsoft Office, which are obviously very commonly required, are not actually likely long-term to improve your job prospects, although you may still need them to get a job. They're not likely to be an indication that that job will grow. In fact, things like payroll and accounting software, again, they're asked for frequently now, but they're not going to future-proof your job. In fact, they're seen in jobs that are likely to decline. On the other hand, skills like animation, design and process engineering are likely to be found in jobs that are going to grow as a percentage of the workforce. And so the overall trend here is the relationship between the routine and non-routine use of technology. Are you just passively plugging things into Excel? Well, your job is probably likely to decline as a percentage of the workforce. Are you analysing that? Then your job is likely, in fact, to grow. So what does this mean in terms of policy? This is a policy conference after all. Well, it can be really difficult to decide how to use this sort of data to shape policy. One of the main reasons is we find that debates in education are fiercely ideological, with many in the UK supporting a more traditional knowledge curriculum, with others talking about skills. So where did we start? Well, just here are some headlines from the UK about the kind of toxic skills ideological debate. I think we can learn a lot from governments around the world who are getting this right and maybe getting it wrong. I'm going to talk just about 11 to 18 here, really, and then Harvey's going to take it from there. In Finland, there's some interesting work going on where the arts are guaranteed from ages 7 to 16 for a certain number of hours a week, equating to about 2,000 lesson hours across that time. The curriculum also actively builds in space for play, for rest, for reflection. Typically, students and teachers take a break after every 45 minutes to allow them to build all-important social and creative skills. What they're really playing with is not overly focusing just on science and mathematics, but making sure that's part of a broad and balanced curriculum that also helps them to design and create. The teachers are also given significant autonomy to shape student experience themselves, and this approach in its totality is seen as one of the reasons for the country's very high PISA results. In China, which has been traditionally seen as really the bastion of rote learning, the national government is concerned about some of those creative and problem-solving skills, and they've set recommendations which, in terms of regional governments don't need to be taken up, but they've suggested that 1 in 5 hours are spent on the arts every week, which is really trying to move away from, again, those traditional knowledge-based curriculum. And that's, I believe, a country waking up to the idea that it can be designed in China as well as manufactured in China, and recognising the importance of that for its workforce. In the UK, Nesta, we run programmes and investments as well as research, has been thinking about what we can do practically to support the workforce of the future in schools. And our research has showed that digital skills need to be taught both in an advanced way, things like coding, but also the basics of software that can be used to communicate, to design, to create. Our original research with Pearson also showed this need for these softer cognitive skills, and we believe teaching these might be tough, and it's even harder to test for them, which has been one of the reasons that schools have been reluctant to invest in them. Actually, you're not really penalised in the UK if you don't invest in those, because they can't really, or it's believed they can't be tested for. But we believe that that's going to be a priority in terms of what a good education looks like. And this builds on some of our previous work at Nesta, where we thought about how you can prepare children with more advanced digital skills like coding. And we supported changes to the national curriculum, which saw the subject of ICT become computer science, which moved away from teaching kids how to just use software and actively allowing them to shape it. We've also done work to provide young people with more access to latest technologies in the classroom, enhancing their digital skills, but actually making sure they are using them for development of important personal skills like collaborative problem solving, and to promote positive attitudes to subjects like maths, which are going to be important as well. And on an industrial level, we believe there's going to be big opportunities in the creative industries. So in the UK, that now makes up about, the creative industries and then creative jobs in other sectors, so like designers and car manufacturers make up about 1 in 12 of the economy, the workforce. And those with those sort of technical STEM skills, although many of them already have it, are going to increasingly need a creative skill set to be able to apply their knowledge to solve problems. And we believe that for that reason, that a broad-based curriculum will continue to be important. So one consistent message, I suppose, that comes out of our research is that policymakers, teachers, and the workforce need to stop fearing the future, or at least if they are going to fear it, they need to at least recognise that there is still an opportunity to shape it. And perhaps most importantly, we shouldn't shy away from subjects which seem really difficult to teach, because actually it's these that inevitably separate us from robots. Thank you.